home care a sustainable solution to the aged care bed shortage? And it should be a fascinating conversation. Facilitating it will be Annette Hill, who's the General Manager for ANZ, and joining her is Norbert Walter, who's the CEO of Kiara Health. We've got Therese Adani, the Chief Communities Officer for HCS Management Support at Catholic Healthcare, and Ian Yates, who needs no introduction and spoke so eloquently earlier today. So we do have a very tight schedule. So what I'm going to ask everyone to do, to let everyone know next door you're all alive, a great big loud round of applause as I hand over to Annette. Come on, nice and loud.
We're going to get stuck right into this because we've got some really big questions here, which I think are going to be a struggle to get through in 30 minutes, but let's see how we go. So the first thing we're going to tackle, and Ian's going to start us off, can home care successfully bridge the gap left by the shortage of aged care beds? And then we're going to talk a little bit about whether this is actually financially viable, what it might look like over the next 5 years. It's three big questions all in one.
Yeah, thanks. So I think I'm not known for being equivocal, so let me say, however, that it depends. And it depends on considerations on both sides of that equation. So certainly, firstly, in terms of the nature of home care packages and home care because it's not just packages. So it depends. It depends on government biting the bullet and properly resourcing what we now call CHSP, which was supposed to be for about, 10 or 12 years ago, we were first going to create a single home care program by government decision, and then twice after that, and we're now, as Grant observed, maybe going to do it in 2017. Anyway, the point is, people present for CHSP services when they have something start to go wrong. If you get in there fast, the research shows quickly you defer advancement into. Similarly with lower level home care packages, the same thing. But if you hold them off for 6 months, then a lot of people get worse. So it depends on the Royal Commission's recommendation about demand provision of home care being implemented. And as I said in the opening session this morning, at the moment, government is saying, we've got you assessed by our assessors on our criteria, and we know that you need these supports, but we're not going to give them to you. And I think over the next few years, that's going to become politically unsustainable. So that's an important question. Are we going to get that flow out? If we had a long time, I could explain why it is not fiscally risky for government, but I've put papers like that to government before. It is not another NDIS. So that's a critical thing. The second is, and go to the Australian Unity presentation earlier today, it depends on the types of home care available. So will we have that whole spectrum of home care, including the higher level clinical, which will over time require that level 8 package to be worth a lot more, or there be a level 9 or 10 package? Because if you're going to integrate CHSP at some point, you're going to have to rethink. I think Grant Corder and I about 8 years ago decided we needed 10 levels of home care package. And so you will need to fund at that higher level. And related to that is the government needs to allow people to buy. Government can fix what it's going to subsidise, but it's got to allow people to buy extra if they've got the capacity to pay that. So no one ought to miss out, but if people have extra capacity to pay, they should be able to. So those things are pretty important on the supply side. But on the resi side, it also depends. I think that really fascinating presentation by Cam Ansell, the metrics of his last slide are what I think he hasn't shared with us yet. How does he get those proportions, right? But at least he's enumerated and differentiated the variety of potential residential living situations into which home care can then be an enabler of continuing either to live where you were or living in some other assisted facility. That's really important. And then in terms of what we traditionally call residential care, again, government has to decide this is what we'll subsidise, but then they have to let people buy more, because that's a way that providers will be able to see their way clear, I think, to making that long-term sustainable, and there's no reason why they shouldn't be able to do that. Let me just say, I think the other thing is that old resi model is actually a financial risk at the moment, because at some point the really growing movement against institutionalisation is going to take off. Now, you can build really sexy new design and still run an institution, and you can do deinstitutionalisation in an old design, but it's harder. But so it's also about culture rebuild from the bottom up in resi care. And yeah, what are the financial incentives going to be? And then finally, just really quickly, obviously, as speakers have pointed out this morning, it's about whether or not this is part of a broader integrated approach to ageing. Are we going to have more preventive health? Are we going to have what the Royal Commission called for, which is redesigning GPs' practices around older Australians so that it's not that episodic, fragmented care? Are we going to do, as Daniel Gannon suggests, recalibrate the pension assets test and rent assistance so you enable people to have more choices? Are we going to increase health and financial literacy? You know, one of the things I think is you ought not be able to be a financial planner in this country if you do not know how and understand and can explain the aged care system. I mean, it is a fundamental thing you're going to run into, and most of them can't do it. They do not understand the aged care system. There's some good people called Aged Care Steps, doing great work in that area, but most financial planners don't. And then we have to have rehab embedded into everything.
Thanks, Ian.
Thanks, Ian. So in my role, I look after home care and retirement living, and we help people stay at home and die at home, but some people do need to go to residential aged care. Residential aged care, as we know, does everything for everyone and is responsible, whereas home care is quite modular. You can have an assisted living where you can get that 24/7, but is typically more expensive for people. People that want to stay at home, if you live alone, as we know, you're more challenged because you need, if you've got advanced dementia, some of these conditions where you can't be alone without a carer. So having carer support is absolutely important. You can live alone, and I think this is where the care management can really make a difference. And with the changes to the funding, we can help people live alone and live a better life through good care management that's preemptive, that can identify respite for carers and organise respite, can identify prevention and treatment through allied health and therapy to keep people living the best life that they can. Another key area is fees. I don't think it's come out clearly that older people in the media, in communication, providers, the government, we haven't as yet communicated to people that they will need to dip into their pockets more. With the changes with the supported home, they will all need to pay, and I think people aren't used to paying. Yes, we're getting better at it, but sometimes it's a pain purchase, and as we know, we've got significant underspend, and we try really hard to get people to uptake physios, to go to nutrition, and they still don't want to spend. But we know that if they do spend, their life can be more meaningful, it can be a better quality of life, it can prevent falls, it can keep them stronger. So I think really getting through that spending, it provides you value, even if it's a better 3 months, to have a better quality of life, less anxiety if you've got dementia. Other ways to ensure that home care can sustainably care for older people to remain at home is giving them meaningful activities. Meaningful activities through what we call the old day centres, respite programs, social outings. At Catholic Healthcare, we're investing heavily in our centre-based respite services. We believe they add significant value to older people in that you can have a whole day with peers, which are really purpose-filled activities where you can do art therapy, you can go out on buses. You also get better value for your money. So you can spend a day that's got really, really good activities, and that can cover a day where it's much financially more affordable than one-on-one care. So it does make your value of your services go further through having these, what we would call healthy ageing centres or activity-based, group-based programs. And I'd just like to add finally, and I know we've talked about it, prevention, but really it's great to see on the supported home a lot of the allied health, nursing, clinical interventions, which can really help people to be in their best shape. And as we know, a lot of people think just because you're getting older that you know, if you can't walk as well, that you just let it decline. And we know through research that that's not the case. So really having allied health professionals, clinical staff to talk to older people and their families about the value of having prevention, rehab treatment at home. I think with the short-term restorative care, we'll be looking to have package pathways so people can have that care and remain at home through their aged care funding. And I also think the primary health networks and other funded organisations, through putting these prevention programs, we've got a funded Stepping On program that we've got with PHN, and I think we need to see the PHNs and some of these other funding bodies to be investing in prevention and treatment, and to have it much more general for older people to live and age well.
Awesome, Therese. Before I get going, I'm probably just going to address a question which I'm sure some of you already are going to ask. Where is this guy from? What's the accent? So let me explain that. I'm originally from Germany, have called Australia home for the last 20 years, but my good old German accent seems to be as persistent as the home care package waitlist we are facing. I also thought I'd quickly introduce Kinyaro Health because most of you wouldn't have heard of us, and I keep it brief. We are a group of 5 care providers, hopefully soon 6, with a vision to leverage scale, capability and capital, while staying resolutely focused on really person-centered human care in the communities we belong to. Central to our model are technology-enabled and scalable shared services, which we fundamentally make available to each of the providers to unburden them and really help them along so that they can focus on what they always have done best, and that is great care in the community. Probably a little bit different is that our ethos is really to join journeys as they have already been laid, and to really help magnify the legacy of each of the providers in their unique way, with their unique relevance for their people, for their clients, and for the communities they support. Quite different. We don't follow, the classic model of absorbing smaller providers into one single big conglomerate. That's not what we believe in. What we believe in is that providers who have already relevance for their clients and for their community, and importantly for their own people, that those providers just need extra help to stay sustainably into the future to maintain that relevance. So that's a little bit about us. Now, with regards to the questions, I think it's a super exciting time for us in home care, because I think some of the topics we are servicing and discussing again today are topics we have been advocating for quite some time, particularly the topic of re-enablement and focusing on independence and all of that. But we are also really excited that there is right now a real mandate for us as home care providers to step further up into the clinical care model and really support people with higher acuity and higher care needs where they want to be supported, and that is in their place of choice. The one thing I would say, as I looked at the question we were being asked, is I think we have to be very careful to not keep thinking of home care as the bailout when beds run out or when other things don't work. Home care ultimately really needs to be given the right place in the care continuum so that ultimately we can actually prevent people ever knocking on the doors of institutionalized care. And now as we think about expanding our clinical services, we certainly will never get into competition with the likes of Emma and Beverly, because those are really, really sophisticated and really models which need much, much bigger scale. However, we believe we can definitely step into the space of clinical care with more nursing support for our clients. But as we know, it's to some extent logistics, we know we need dependability of demand on us. Therefore, again, we need to embed that into the service model. We cannot just say, yes, once in a while when the beds run out, we need home care to step into those clinical services. The other aspect is, and again, I mentioned this, we need a timely funding. I mean, it's just shocking how often we see people going straight out of not receiving any care into residential care because time just passes. And it's very sad. And I hope that my German accent will once go. And I also hope with that, and hopefully much sooner, the home care waitlist is gone and we will never have it back again. The other aspect I think is important, and we touched on this a little bit earlier, we need to ultimately be really smart about where we place those really limited and valuable resources across the care continuum. Because what we are finding is when we try to recruit nurses and allied health professionals, we are in pretty stiff competition with other parts of the healthcare continuum. And we just need to find a way of sorting that out so that the resources are not just there where they, where the interest of the provider is being met, but where that the resources are there where the interests of the clients and the community are being met. And I think we have to get smarter about that. I also think that it's important that we loosen up our thinking about who can provide clinical care. I too often hear it has to be a nurse. The reality is, I mean, we already run models with, I think what we call right now micro-credentialing. We already run models with people who are being trained into some of the more clinical service models, and they are not nurses. They work under supervision of nurses, they work under supervision of allied health professionals, but that is really freeing up a whole workforce to amplify the clinical capacity we have in this country. And dare I say, it's a huge motivator for those people who just have not chosen to be on a path of getting a clinical qualification to be able to basically grow and develop in that context. So we're actually quite excited about that. However, what we need to have is a regulatory framework which supports that. The other aspect of the regulatory framework is we can't keep wasting valuable resources on administration. I mean, it just doesn't make sense, and we touched on that earlier, but it is a concern that rules are being set without considering the system effect of those rules. But then I think the last point I will make around this is we really should never forget that at the end of the day, our job is for people to never get to the level of acuity that they require institutionalized care. We need to make sure that we keep that emphasis on well-being and re-enablement as strong as it possibly can be. And in that context, I think one of the challenges we have been facing ongoing, and that is that the motivators to support people to stay independent, to stay low acuity, to be able to do and look after themselves as much as they can, that stays in stark contrast to the financial motivators we have to consider as a provider to stay sustainable. Because we all know the higher the acuity, the higher the dependency, the more financially sustainable often the model becomes. And we need to break that perverse incentive that people who are more dependent on us ultimately are the better people for us to stay sustainable. Now, having said all that, we are super optimistic for the next 5 years because we see it as a new dawn for us as a sector. We see it as a real opening up of a dialogue which we would never have been able to have, which we can right now. And we absolutely are welcoming and embracing the challenge put on us as a sector to find solutions of better care and support for clients while improving sustainability for us as a country and the taxpayer. What we often remind ourselves as we are chasing those solutions, as we are trying to innovate around sustainability, we have to remember good care is good business, never the other way around. And I think that is one of the challenges. The other challenge is we need to take the people with us on the journey. I see the next 5 years almost less as a financial challenge. I see it way more as a leadership challenge to make sure that those people who put their hearts on the line every day, that those people stay committed on their journey. And the only way we can do that is really helping them build resilience, helping them build agility, and giving them the tools, ultimately, as I mentioned earlier, to upskill and be ready for the future. And I think the last comment I will make is absolutely, we need to join forces. There's just no other way around it. We need to join forces to come up with the solutions, to find the capital to invest into building those solutions, and to stay focused on ultimately the client outcomes, which I know matter so much for all of us.
Thanks, Norbert. So I sit in your camp as well from a perspective of, I think that there is a continuum of care and there is a place for all of the different models of aged care that exist. There is a place for residential care, there's a place for retirement living, there's a place for home care. I think that for me, this is less a question about, is it a solution to the aged care bed shortage? There was someone debating whether the shortage is as big as it really is right now. I actually think it's about, what does the person want? I think sometimes we get so caught up in all of the policy and all of the regulation. This should be about what's in the best interest of the person. And I think in most cases, you will find people want to stay at home for as long as they possibly can. So what does that mean for us as a sector? I think it means that we have to make it financially sustainable. We have to find ways to make this sector work. And I think we heard time and time again this morning that we need to take some of that control back as a sector, and we need to come up with more innovative models. And I mean, obviously for me now, I'm on the tech side. And my big interest now is, how do you give back time? Because one of my biggest frustrations when I was an operational executive in aged care was that year on year, red tape wasn't getting cut. Year on year, the administrative burden on my team was getting bigger. And I was getting to a point where, how much more can they take? Because they're no longer spending time where they should be spending time, which is with the client. So we want them spending the vast majority of their time with the client, delivering the outcomes that that client wants. So what can we do? Tech's obviously changing. There's a lot of possibility there, and we can start looking for ways to minimise some of that administrative burden through the use of AI, through the use of agentic workflows. We're going to hear more and more about that. But it doesn't change, though, that we need as a sector to really start working on what else can we do differently to how we've done it in the past, and probably push some of the compliance side a little bit behind how, because often we make decisions based on, you know, the risk of the outcomes that can come out of those compliance burdens. And I think that this is probably a good time for us to now move on to I think we kind of all agree that there's this is the right long-term strategy. Home care is the right long-term strategy for the industry. What do we need to do? And I'm going to give you all a go, to make sure that the sector can actually meet the growing demand. We saw all of those numbers this morning. They're not going to get any smaller. More people are going to need care. What do we need to do to then maintain the high quality of care? What else could be done? Who wants to go first?
Look, I think in the future we need customers educated. They need to be savvy and aware on choice, so they've got options. And I think it needs to be out there for the consumer to know what's on offer. I think to your point, we absolutely have to. We've got a new operating model that we need to change, and I think the principles behind the people, we need to have effortless customer experience. We want to empower our customers, and we need to build customer loyalty. They don't want us to be difficult to deal with. And I don't think as a sector we've done enough in investing. And I think with the financial changes, we'll need to be larger scale, because we need to, it's not just to set up a business with people, we'll need the infrastructure to ensure that the sector is sustainable. I think, you know, the changes with the supported home are significant in terms of pricing for consumers, in terms of some of the care management fees. The fact that we need to collect more from clients will cause debt challenges and expectations. Costs to serve within the new model, I think, are going to increase. So we're going to have to be looking at ways to be creative with our business model and invest with multiple areas around omni-channel, you know, automated text mining, self-help portals for people, for us to be dealing with. Leadership capability is absolutely critical, and getting the balance right between risk and governance and financial in leadership teams is absolutely going to be critical. I think as a sector we need to just look out for the vulnerable communities and the financially disadvantaged. I think there's an intention within the changes that that the financial disadvantage will be looked after, but I haven't seen how that's going to play out, because they do need to pay more for everyday living and contributions there. So I think as a sector, if we want it sustainable, I think we need to ensure that we've got a very close lens on those disadvantaged people.
They're going to get...
Oh, you want to say something? Okay, you go. Thank you.
So looking at the clock ticking away in front of us, 3 quick things that we won't go into in depth. But number one is, and this applies resi and home care, but it's really critical, we actually need to rethink, most of the industry does, around the consumer, around the older person, redesigning around the older person. Fundamentally, I'm going to just say I have talked to lots of CEOs in this sector over my CODA years who told me they were doing that. I see it in practice by exception. And I can give lots of examples. It actually needs real redesign. Secondly, as I argued in this morning's session very quickly, because we didn't have a lot of time, actually needs to be a lot smarter in political advocacy that cannot be dismissed as the self-interest of the provider. Much more clearly evidence-based, experienced political capacity to know how to, because you're quite right. I mean, the compliance burden, I've been always careful about using that word, but it is a compliance burden. It has to be addressed, but it won't be addressed by presenting rational arguments to bureaucrats. You actually have to indicate that it's a waste of the taxpayers' money, and therefore services are not getting to the older person altogether. And I had a third point, but I can't remember what it was.
Norbert? We've got 2.5 minutes. I'm going to take your question time. Squeezing us into 30 minutes was tough.
You know what? I don't think I have anything substantial to add. I think it's much more important to open the floor to any questions.
And my third point again from this morning is the sector has to start defining, by mechanisms I could go into, we don't have to, what is best practice, and set that as the expectation of what can be delivered, because then the sector is in the position to start to dictate to government when it can define and hold people to best practice.
Actually, if I could just lean on that one. Finally, as a sector, and we heard it this morning, and Tom talked about that. Now it's really about time for us as a sector to create a real clear vision for the future of this sector. We cannot wait for politicians to come up with it. We have to do it ourselves. And I think it's a beautiful opportunity for us to step in and lean into, to ultimately solve problems others find so hard to solve. But we have to take it on. That opportunity will never come again.
Agree. Is there any questions out there? Please go ahead. I think someone's coming from the back there.
Oh, we've got a mic coming.
Thanks very much for the presentation. I had a question on really this theme of teaming between the supply and demand side of the equation. I'm really new to the sector. I've only been in here 7 weeks. past life in tech and public transport. And one of the ideas we looked at public transport is how we not just provide more services, but actually influence the demand side of that equation through education, through technology, to shift behaviour to also respond to what was being provided on the supply side. We also see it in healthcare with people moving to Medicare urgent clinics instead of hospitals. I'm just curious on that theme of partnering with clients and teaming. Are there areas that jump out to you that if clients were fully empowered with technology, that could also support better matching with what the market can actually provide in terms of services?
Well, obviously, I mean, we have already a very vibrant, what we call self-managed sector. And that is probably the closest to a really consumer-led kind of choice of who do they want to provide care to them, and really building that relationship with that network of care for them. There's way more to be done in that space because clearly some of the financial incentives for self-management are going to change come 1st of July. But what's not going to change is people wanting to take control of their journey. That stays. People want to be not told by a provider what's good for them. They want to ultimately be engaged in that journey. And I think there's way more we can do. And obviously there are some great models already out there and more to be done. I would also just like to make one further comment. We have often talked about not enough workforce in this sector. Frankly, that's not our experience. But what our experience is we have workforce, and then all of a sudden there's no demand because we are, yet again, sitting on a home care package wait list, and we lose workforce because we can't keep them busy because they depend on the work, obviously, they are having. So I think we also have to really acknowledge that home care package wait list is not only an issue from a client perspective, it's a workforce issue because we are just not retaining the workforce as they are available right now.
The only thing I'd probably add is I think as a sector, most people don't actually want to talk about the after, and when they get there, nobody wants to accept that they need the care. Sometimes this sector can be a little bit harder than, say, disability services. I think that when Therese was talking about, we need to probably do a lot more comms out about preparing for this and talking about the importance of, rehabilitation, re-enablement, and the advantage of talking about these things earlier than it happens so that, it's not a crisis, because often it's crisis that leads to aged care, which isn't the ideal place. But on that note, I don't want to take any more time because we do have another panel coming behind us. A huge thank you to our panel, and thank you for listening.
A big round of applause, please, for Annette, who moderated that panel, Therese, Ian, and Norbert. Thank you so much. I think there's a real consensus about the sustainability of home care, and I love the way Norbert spoke about finding where it sits in the overall care continuum. It does have a role to play, but it's not the answer, but it has a big part to play in everyone's journey.